Hello, my name's Jackie Carter. I'm the EDI Disability Academic Lead at the University of Manchester, and I've set up a series of in-conversation pieces called Let's Talk Disability. The reason for this is that I want people who have a disability and who work and study at the University of Manchester to have opportunity to share what their lived experience, their everyday experience is with somebody in a position of influence, a senior leader at the university. So each episode will feature 2 guests, and each of those guests will have a conversation about what it means to have a disability at the University of Manchester. And at the end of the conversation, each will commit to one action, we're calling them one things, where they will take away something from the conversation that they've had and do something with it. I hope you enjoy listening, and we'll make, of course, the transcripts available for everybody. Thank you. Okay, so hello and welcome to episode 5. We're on episode 5 now of the Let's Talk Disability series of conversations. And just to repeat, I'm Jackie Carter. I'm the academic lead for EDI Disability at the University of Manchester, and I live with invisible disabilities. And I'm proud to say I've got 2 guests in the office today, neither of whom I've met before, face to face anyway. And I'm going to hand you over to each of them to introduce themselves. And Katie, I'm really pleased to see, like me, you're wearing your sunflower lanyard.
I always think it means that people aren't going to sit next to you on the train, which for me is a massive bonus. But yeah, I think it's great that Manchester support the sunflower scheme. I think it's really helpful.
Fabulous. Lovely. So let's start with you, Katie. Can you do an introduction, please? Say who you are and why you're here.
So my name's Katie. My surname's Twomey. I'm a lecturer in language and communicative development at in FBMH. I teach on the speech and language therapy programme, but I'm a researcher rather than a clinician. I've been at Manchester something horrifying like 8 years now. This is my first lectureship after a series of postdoctoral research contracts. The reason I'm here is because I suppose I've got 3 hidden disabilities. Actually, I'm autistic, and I have generalised anxiety disorder and panic disorder as well, which are obviously things that I need to be careful about managing. My autism diagnosis came when I'd been at Manchester, I think, a couple of years, and I had a period of quite severe burnout. It was quite debilitating. Because the lecturer job is just so different to the postdoc job. So this resulted in me getting cognitive behavioural therapy to manage the anxiety issues, which was brilliant. Highly recommend everyone get yourself some CBT. But also my therapist raised the possibility that there might be a neurodivergence there, and that's how I ended up getting diagnosed. So yeah, that's kind of my story, how that brings you up to speed.
Fabulous, thank you. Did you want to add on anything about the network?
Oh, of course, yeah. That's kind of an obvious one, isn't it? So I'm also co-chair of the relatively newly formed Neurodivergent staff network alongside Matthew Harrison. So it's kind of in its infancy at the moment, and I will come on to this probably later. There's a lot of work to do, not very much time to do it in, but we've had fabulous support from Jackie, from Kathy Bradley in the EDI Directorate as well. So we're trying to make baby steps towards getting that more established and being more of a source of support for staff and PGRs.
Great. And there's already how many members for people who wanted to participate?
There's over 100, I think. I should have looked this up, shouldn't I? Obvious one. But I know that, so this is Matthew's idea. I can't take the credit. But I know that the ND network is, growing apace. There's a lot of neurodivergent people at the university. Although I've looked at the statistics, and I think there's actually fewer than you would expect based on the population statistics. But that might be because maybe the ND network isn't as visible and it's new and that kind of thing. But I think there's a lot that can be done at Manchester, but in any big organisation, to support people like me, and we can be absolutely amazing if we're put in the right environment. So yes,
thank you very much. Allan, over to you. If you could do an intro as well, please, that would be great.
Well, thank you for having me. My name's Allan Pacey. I have a long title. Let me get this right. I am Deputy Dean and Deputy Vice President of the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health. I've been in the university as we record this about 7 months now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, welcome.
So I'm still getting to grips with Manchester and finding out where things are and who people are. I spent 31 years at a university close to here in the other side of the Pennines, where I was a lecturer, senior lecturer, professor, became head of department, became head of 2 departments.
Oh, lucky you.
And so career-wise, it was a natural step. But I think in the context of today, I've spent probably the last 7 or 8 years as head of department working with people with disabilities, visible and invisible disabilities, and also to some extent dealing with my own. So I have a few things going on in my life, mostly medical. So when I was 35, I had testicular cancer.
Goodness.
And when I was 40, I had a form of cancer called non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was unrelated. And that's left me with a few scars, physical scars, but also it's caused me to now have diabetes, and I have a few leg problems because of the radiotherapy that I had. So I'm kind of well aware of some forms of disability. I don't score terribly well on a dyslexia score.
Oh, interesting.
But I've never had a formal diagnosis, but I've done things in head of department training where we had to kind of do scores. And so I was a bit embarrassed that I've
had very similar experiences with the AQ50, which is a screener for autism, and I come up with a score of like 38 or something. But, because I work in psychology, it's a thing that we know about, and I was always a bit like, hang on a minute, that might explain some things.
Yeah, and I remember when I was kind of a PhD student, I really struggled with kind of writing and language, and words would bounce around and so on and so forth. But I've actually worked a way through that, I think.
Tell us.
Well, no, I haven't got a magic step. It's just, I think, with experience and actually not worrying about it, I use the computer to highlight issues. I use the tech, but I also spend time, and I don't try and do things in a rush.
Right. No, absolutely.
So,
you should take the time you need to do things, shouldn't you?
Yeah.
I think that's the story with a lot of neurodivergent people, whether they're diagnosed, self-identified, or, neurodivergent curious, is that we build in our own coping mechanisms, and what supports one person might not support another person. But a good employer will be one that allows people to play to their strengths by having those mechanisms in place. So for a dyslexic person, it might be, being allowed more time to do a task. Or for me, it might be doing stuff online or hybrid meetings, for instance. One of the things in the journey that I've been on, because obviously this is a new disability for me, relatively speaking, is the notion of reasonable adjustments. So the adjustments that would work really well for me might actually make someone else's life more difficult or less pleasant and fulfilling, for instance, because I don't feel this huge need to be constantly socialising, for instance. Autistic people often, I don't want to speak for everyone, but often socialise in different ways. So it's an interesting question in itself, like how far can you go with reasonable adjustments? Another example might be, someone wearing a mask for COVID reasons or whatever it is. That's going to be difficult for people with hearing loss. So it's doing a dance, isn't it, of who do we support and how? And it's tricky.
I think that's the thing as head of department in my previous institution that I found the most difficult. So I was very open to reasonable adjustments, but sometimes they were very resource intensive. And when you're in a department that hasn't got any money, it is a difficult one to balance that. But also, and I've noticed this myself, sometimes, as you said, a reasonable adjustment for one person might not work for someone else. And I had a very good example here the other day, which I think is related to my own issue with words. And we had an online meeting where some of us were in the room, some were online. And we had the ticker tape going across the bottom, and I couldn't process the words, and for some reason I couldn't hear the speech with that going, and I couldn't turn it off because I was in a room with other people. So it was
you're stymied, really, aren't you?
It was an awkwardness. Now I appreciate that some people in the room may have loved that. And it may have helped them. So getting the balance right, I think, is tricky sometimes for an employer.
I've had really productive and supportive conversations with our head of department, who also is my line manager. And I think that all you can really do is compromise. So, some people want meetings to be online, so you have them online this month, in person next month. And, I don't think you can, unless you've got everybody in an organisation who has the same disability, it's not actually possible to accommodate everyone all of the time, much as I wish it was. I'm not trying to argue for not having accommodations, but It has to be a feasible thing to do. I agree. Like in an ideal world, we'd accommodate everybody in every way possible, but I just don't think it is. And I think not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good is probably quite a pragmatic approach. There might be people listening to this who are horrified by what I'm saying, but small changes can make big differences. I think that's the thing.
Can I come back to you both on, you used the term a good employer, okay, and I was struck when you were saying that we're talking about leadership and ensuring that there's reasonable adjustments, and we have the Disability Advisory Support Service, which is a fantastic provision at the University of Manchester, but there's a need for pragmatism also, always, isn't there, for the disabled person. So I'm really curious about how we develop a culture, an environment in which people can talk, because for those of us who are willing and able to share our disability, and thank you, Allan, for doing so very openly, and for yourself, Katie, that is one thing. But we know we're undercounting the number of people at the University of Manchester who are disabled. We just know that from the data. Okay, it's probably, at least a 50% undercount according to, if you compare it to national statistics. And there are reasons for that people don't want to share. So what about the people who perhaps don't feel able to talk out? What would your thoughts be around your own experience? How can we support them with the staff networks or through good management and leadership?
I think, so my experience of diagnosis was a bit unusual because I'm close friends with a colleague, so initially colleague, now friend, who's an autism diagnostician. So she was able to support me through that process. So I don't feel that I have any kind of internalised stigma. So I feel like I'm in a privileged position where I have a voice, I should use it. Although then there's the balance of like, how many things do you say yes to? When do you find the time to do all this stuff? But I think role modelling is really, really important. So people who feel like they're able to, coming and being open about it. And yeah, kind of, okay, this is going to be my, the thing that I prepared notes for. EDI feels like, and disability in particular, I think, feels like it's a nice to have. And what I think it should be is it should be built into absolutely everything that we do. I know, Jackie, you said similar things about disability also seems to be forgotten about. I think some of the time it's harder, perhaps, because there's kind of physical adaptations that we have to make in order to accommodate people. But it shouldn't be that way, because disabled people, irrespective of the disability, have got so much to contribute. And I know if I were allowed to work in the way that suits me best, I'd be firing out papers left, right and centre. So there are advantages to accommodating in that way. But I've for a while now been thinking about the FBMH expectations of your research and your teaching contribution, and also the FBMH promotion criteria. EDI, I don't think it's even mentioned in promotion. And it's an afterthought in the research and teaching expectations. And the section that does mention EDI is buried in social responsibility, and it mentions Athena, Swan and the Race Equality Charter, but there's nothing about disability in there. So I'm in this position at the moment where I get allocated 14 hours a year to be chair of the ND staff network. Last week I spent an entire day doing things related to that. This week I've got 3-hour-long sessions. It's just totally unrealistic. But it's important, right? I really want to do it. So I'm damaging my own career prospects currently because I don't have time to write the research grants, and I have to do the teaching, obviously. So the research gets pushed to one side. And actually, I'm autistic. Like, research is what I love the best in the world. But because I take this stuff so seriously, that's suffering. And I think a helpful, concrete thing to do would be to build EDI into the expectations of what it's like to be a Manchester person. I think that would be really, really helpful. And, promote people on the basis of the contributions they're making. Make time, find money from somewhere to give somebody a day a week rather than 1 hour a month to do these things. So that would be, I think I've kind of preempted the end thing, but, I'm not sure whether people at your level are down in the details of those things.
Allan, before you respond, can I just say something that I think is worth having actually on record? We do have a new Vice-Chancellor coming to the University of Manchester, Professor Duncan Iverson, and we have in the EDI team had separate meetings with him before he's come in. Now, we know he's very, very committed, and you probably won't be surprised to hear me say that I was a person who talked about ensuring that disability is as centre stage as REC and Athena Swan, because that's important, but also that there's a recognition of the resource need in the way that you're talking about, and a reflection of that in all of the criteria that you're talking about, promotion, recruitment, and so on. So I just wanted to set that context out in terms of, I think we are going through a period of change as a university. Nancy Rothwell, our current VC, was on the previous episode, in which she clearly is very committed as well, but I think there's more to be done. I think we recognise that. So I just wanted to set that context, Alan, before you dive in from the perspective of one of the faculties in the bigger university. But thank you, Katie. I think that's such an important contribution.
So let me start with generalities. So I think for me it's all about culture. And getting the culture right allows people to talk, to declare. We can have conversations about reasonable adjustments, and we can have conversations about expectations. I haven't been in Manchester long enough to know whether or not the culture is right here from this perspective. If I'm honest, I think there's some things I would like to change. There are some things that seem to work well. You know, the social responsibility agenda here seems very strong. But I think I agree with you that ED&I shouldn't be separate. It should be a core thread throughout. And I see that in terms of how roles are advertised, in terms of how things are put on the agenda, in terms of the technology even sometimes, as we spoke earlier. And there I think there's things that are a way to go. And I like trying to change culture. And I've had some really, really rich conversations whilst I've been here from people who have been struggling, have had medical problems or other problems at work, and you know, sitting down with a cup of coffee and talking it through and developing a solution is as productive as any policy or any statement. You know, just getting that human contact and that human discussion going, which is why this is so important.
I was going to say the same thing. So since being in touch with you, Jackie, and Kathy, and the EDI directorate as well, that makes a massive difference. So I don't know whether this is a me thing or an autistic thing, but these complicated structures, like I'm quite intrigued about what the difference is between your two job titles. I find it all very confusing.
I don't know either.
Good. I'm not alone. Phew. So having a human face and the ear of somebody who can influence is massively important. And hopefully, to an extent, the staff networks do that as well. I mean, the stuff that the Disabled Staff Network have done, they're absolutely incredible powerhouses of human beings. They're wonderful. Yeah. And hopefully we'll find the time and space to make the ND network more influential. I guess that's probably not the right word. But so I do think that in terms of cultural change, it's like, look at these amazing people who are doing these incredible things. So I guess there's not template, like the foundations are there, but change is quite glacial in higher education, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And Manchester is big and complex. And I have to say, I hadn't appreciated that quite to the extent that it is until I arrived here. But going on to your point about time and resource, I think that's an interesting one. I think that's bigger than faculty to think that one through.
Yeah, potentially.
You know, I think Manchester needs to decide what it wants to see and put the resource to that appropriately and see people rewarded who step into that role and go forward. And it doesn't chime well with me to hear you say that you may be damaging your career through that. So either we have
autistically blunt, but it's true.
I don't disagree, and I've been in a similar position in my previous career. It wasn't in terms of ED&I, it was in terms of public engagement. I was doing an awful lot of public engagement that wasn't recognised at all at the time, but the agenda changed, and so I can see with a new president, I can see with a new wind that some of these things may well be looked at.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
And I think we have to remember we are an organisation that needs to achieve its core objectives in terms of research income and in terms of its teaching and so on and so forth. So it's a balancing act. Yeah. And I think that's for more than just a single faculty to deal with.
Yes,
I think that's something that is needs to be cross-university wide, because we need the same focus in FBMH as we do in FSC, as we do in humanities.
Absolutely. And you both talked about it being sort of a core central approach, a part of what we do, not separate, not an adjunct, not an add-on, not particular people's jobs, but something that we all take into account as we do social responsibility.
Yeah, so it should be like that in terms of it's an expectation on everybody, not just interested parties. So, you know, we're sitting here with our hidden disabilities and, you know, we've got a motivation for getting involved in this stuff, but everybody should be aware of the issues. So one good thing is that I'm working with DAS to develop training materials. That they're off doing all the hard work. I was just kind of consulting, I suppose, but training materials around autism and neurodiversity. So that's going to be good because we'll have a resource where we can point people towards and say, this is where you find out kind of the current understanding, the cutting edge and things. So stuff is changing, but it's just, I'm going to moan now, but it's exhausting, the amount. And Matthew has the same issue. He constantly has to say no. But so he has to turn down requests for help, as I do too. But one of the points that you're making, which I think is really important, is that it needs to be consistent across faculties. So one of the issues that we're having raised on and I think you're aware of some of these as well, Jackie, is so on the ND staff network, people are talking about adjustments, and some people have managed to have them, some people haven't. It's very patchy. And I think it's sort of the luck of the draw with who your line manager is at the moment. So, and obviously that's, you know, the source of unhappiness for some people because they see somebody getting adjustments that would benefit them. So, I agree that cross-faculty is important.
But I think line managers are key.
Yes.
And I think heads of department are key. And I haven't yet got the sense of how embedded some of this is in individual line managers. But I think that's where the culture change comes from, because if most of us are informed from our own personal experience, that's the strongest driver. You can put on training courses, but until you've had to deal with something as a line manager, you will have a range of experiences. You know, I've now got a library of things that if someone asks me X, I know a potential solution is Y, and I potentially know where to go. But that's a learned thing from me, and we have to, I think, make sure that all of our line managers and all of our leaders are kind of on the same page. I don't yet get the sense of how well embedded that is. The way you're looking at me, Jackie, suggests that that's perhaps not the case.
A non-visual environment, so I'm nodding my head. And that's partly why I've created this series, to start the conversation at the level that we're having this conversation at today. But it has to cascade down, and we have to bring line managers along with us. And often it's just a case of people, because it's I would argue that because it's possibly the least well discussed and talked about of the protected characteristics, people don't know where to start to have the conversation.
Indeed.
They simply do not know. And it's a case, I think, of ensuring that people have the resources, feel safe in the environment that they are working in or studying in, to have the conversation about what their needs are, which of course they might not even know. As you said yourself, we don't always know our needs, do we? Until
that was students quite a lot. Actually, they don't come. You know, they get a new diagnosis. They don't necessarily have the vocabulary to know what to ask for. So the more line managers understand, then absolutely.
So where does that leave us? I mean, we come back time and time again in meetings, the EDI committee meetings at the university level, in these sorts of conversations, in conversations I have when I'm asked to go around and talk to faculty groups or school groups or departmental groups. And it often comes back to, where do we start? And, you know, you've got some lived experience, both of you. Where would be a good place to intervene? You know, we could create interventions that create more resources. What do you think? What needs to happen around, let's take autism in particular, or neurodivergence?
So one of the things that we want to do with the ND staff network is very much make it a safe space for people to have these conversations in. It's massively important, I think, for people with whatever disability, you know, that to not have to explain all of the time, to have that safe space, at the risk of repeating myself. But I'm doing another thing not a million miles away from this tomorrow. And one of the things that I want to say there is that I want to ask the community where to start, because I'm just me. I've only been officially autistic for 4 years or something. What do all my amazing autistic friends want to change. I think that would be, because I've done so many of these type things. And I don't want to be the self-appointed voice of the autistics. I would like other people to feel that they can speak too. So yeah, I think from my perspective, what I can do is starting with the ND staff network and say, how can we serve you, I guess.
So important. And do you mind sharing with us who you're doing that with tomorrow?
That is with, so Kathy Bradley's organised it. It's with Matthew, my co-chair, Matthew Harrison, and PJ Hemaway is, he's agreed to be a, what's the word, not patron.
Sponsor, senior sponsor.
Yes, senior sponsor. Yes, which would be fantastic. And also, I think he's very open about the fact that he has dyscalculia, which is a different neurotype. Finally, someone who's not just autistic. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing
Wonderful.
that.
PJ was on the first episode of this series in which he talked very openly about that. So it's wonderful that Kathy has persuaded him to become the senior sponsor.
He jumped at the chance, actually. Yeah. He said it's a real passion of his. So this is exactly what I mean about role modelling, right? It's like show people who've just acquired a new diagnosis, successful people, senior people. You know, I mean, I don't advocate outing people for anything whatsoever. Like, disclosure is incredibly personal. But if more senior people do feel that they can talk about these things, it can only be good.
Mm. And that helps change the culture.
Well, yeah,
absolutely. And you've done that today. You know, you shared very openly, and it was very much a case of me saying to you before you came on, share what you're able and willing to share. And you know, you've role modelled, as Katie said. You know, you've shown that senior leaders can also have disability, whether or not you use any of the services we have. But you've given us a very open rendition of your own personal journey, which I would say, I'd agree with you, that gives us more motivation and a unique personal insight into what it's like, because you know, disability is the one thing that perhaps all of us at some point in our lives might experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So almost inevitably everybody. Yeah, I think so. And also, just as an aside, you'd be very welcome to join the ND staff network if you're dyslexia curious, but don't feel compelled to.
Well, send me an email after that. It'll be interesting to.
There are nice chats on there, actually. I mean, we Matthew and I really push for time, and so we haven't put as much into it as we could have done, but we're trying to get there. And yeah, it's a nice place where you can just ask questions, very democratised.
What I'm thinking is, while I'm sitting here, is, and I'm maybe rushing to the end now, is one thing I've tried to begin in the faculty, which I think has happened before, but we haven't had many since I've been here, is our faculty fora. And I've seen this work in my previous institution, and just getting people together to talk about a topic. Now, we had one recently on the topic of AI, which is very interesting.
Oh, I think I watched some of that.
And I learned a lot, and I wasn't aware of all the things that it could or couldn't do. But I'm just wondering if this is a topic for a future faculty forum, if people would be willing, you know, just to share and just to open up the discussion, and just it would signal to the faculty that we're interested and that we want to listen, and that we will do what we can to try and help.
That would be wonderful. For disability broadly, I think would be helpful. Rather than, that would be a very good idea.
That's great. That might come to your end. But I was thinking before we get to the end question, because I am going to ask each of you to ask the other a question at the end of this conversation. We've talked a lot about the challenges, the barriers, the difficulties, the exhaustion that comes up time and time again. But what is it? You used a phrase, I didn't write it down, Katie, but you used a phrase about, you know, research is your passion, and if you could, you'd be doing that all the time and producing papers and turning them out. But then you're giving a lot of your time to this because this is something you care about as well. What's the upside, if you like? Let's talk about the strengths as well.
To other talks that I've done, there are. I mean, I don't want to diminish the challenges that some people have, but autistic people have this capacity, and again, I'm talking in generalisations here. That hyper-focused state that I think people know about is characteristic of ADHD as well. It's just amazing. So I can sit down and be interested in something, and it's probably not very healthy, but I can sit down and focus for 5 hours and not go to the loo, not eat anything like that, because I am so interested, and that can make me very happy, very productive. So obviously I thrived when I was a postdoc, because that's like all I was doing. It was amazing. So that's sort of related to the concept of autistic joy. And so if I find the right kind of pine cone, that would be me for the day. Oh, it's so beautiful. Or like a nice ladybird or a particular type of leaf or something. Like, I get very excited about seeing mathematical patterns in nature. So anything a bit fractal just sends me off on one. So that is, and I always say, so I've done talks specifically about autistic strengths before, and I always say, like, the challenges are awful. There are some days where it links with anxiety, some days where I can't leave the house without being sick first. I have to get that out of the way and then I can go. But then I would not swap the autistic joy aspect of things. I wouldn't let anyone take that away if it meant I didn't have the anxiety too. It's really... We also communicate differently, and when autistic people get together, I don't know if you've ever seen a group of us talking to each other, but like, our body language is different. Look at me waving my arms around. We kind of jump topics when we're speaking. So I love conversations with autistic people because they communicate the same way as me. So one of the joys is being in your community, and then special interests as well. So ask any autistic person about their special interests, they'll probably have more than one. But yeah, we can get very excited talking about these kind of things. So there are lots and lots and lots of strengths, and actually, you know, the reception since I've started doing all of this stuff, it sounds like the Katie show, it's not supposed to, but the reception you get from like situations like this, or you know, my line manager, that's a joyful thing in itself, actually, because you're feeling, right, okay, I am doing some good here, hopefully.
So let's start to wrap up then. I don't know who wants to start first. Normally, in fact, Katie, I'm going to ask you to ask Allan the first question. So we end up these conversations with a list of just one things. So you could start. What
would be your main take home then from having talked to a unicorn? That's what I say about autistic people.
Well, I think what's resonated with me today is that the fact that we need to continue the conversation and we need to try and change the culture. And I think it's what I was saying earlier about across the faculty, which is the only bit that I have responsibility for. I think we can begin that conversation by shining a light on this and having a bespoke faculty forum about disability, which can weed in some of the things that we've talked about. Quite how we do that, I'm going to ask for some help there. But I will go back to the office and I will raise it with my colleague who helps with that. And I think that would help start to change the culture.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, I think you will have the backing of your EDI colleagues in the faculty as well, because I know they're very, very keen to do more in this space.
EDI people they've been absolutely brilliant, yeah.
So Allan, your turn to ask Katie.
So Katie, what one thing would make a difference to your lived experience at the University of Manchester?
See, the thing is, there's 100 million different things. And I'm aware I've only got kind of the one opportunity really to say this out loud, but I think, so broadly it's the culture change, but tangibly building EDI into, I know you said it has to be consistent across faculties and it's bigger than faculty, but into those expectations and into the promotion criteria. It's not just disability that these things are ableist around. Oh, sorry, this not discriminatory, that's the technical term, but exclusionary, I guess. So that a lot of the research expectations are like travel to international conferences, and it's like, well, I've got 3 children under 5, so I'm not really going to be doing that. So having a review of all of these expectations with an EDI hat on, but you know, with the focus on disability, I think that's really important. And then that's like the catalyst, isn't it? Because then people start getting promoted, and then you've got your role models, and could have a kind of a positive snowball effect.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to thank both of you very much. I've learned something today. It's been such a brilliant conversation to listen to. I hope the listeners are also going to enjoy it when it comes out. And it just remains for me to say thank you. Did you have any final parting words?
I don't think so. It's just lovely to meet you, and really refreshing to hear you say, you know, culture change is important. I think that gives me optimism.
It's lovely to have this conversation. Thanks for the opportunity.
Likewise. Thank you both very much.